The morning light shone through the curtains of my bedroom, and I opened my eyes, listening to the silence of the house. In 42 years of married life, I'd never gotten used to waking up alone. It had been 6 years since Harold had been gone, and I kept thinking he was about to come into the room with a cup of tea, as he did every morning. I, Luella Bramble, 67 years old, a widow, a former school librarian, and almost invisible to my own family. Though I'll admit, that last definition didn't come to me right away. It slowly formed in my mind with each missed call, each canceled visit, each sorry mom, no can do today. Slowly getting out of bed, I put on an old but favorite robe. Harold had given it to me for our 30th anniversary. The cashmere had lost its softness, but on cold Plymouth mornings, it still gave me warmth and memories. In the kitchen, I put the kettle on and looked in the fridge. Today was the big day, a family dinner to which I had invited the children and grandchildren. Such gatherings had become rare, especially in recent years. Everyone was busy with their own lives. Perry with his insurance company, Luella with endless accounting reports. The grandchildren were growing up immersed in their phones and computers, and even 10-year-old Abigail, the youngest, now preferred video games to our reading together. I pulled out a notepad to make a shopping list. Perry loved roast beef, Luella favored fish, and her husband Finley could eat anything as long as the portion was large. Vanity, Perry's wife, was always on some new diet, so it was worth making a salad for her. The grandkids, well, they weren't likely to appreciate anything other than fries and chicken nuggets. I sighed, remembering how Perry had loved my apple pie as a kid, and Luella had always asked for more stewed vegetables. How things had changed. Looking at my watch, I realized that the store should have opened by now. Quickly finishing my tea, I dressed and went outside. Plymouth greeted me with a light rain, typical English weather, even in the middle of June. Pulling my hood up, I headed for the bus stop. My old Honda had been sitting idle in the garage for a long time. After I'd slightly scratched my bumper while parked outside the supermarket last fall, Perry had insisted I stop driving. "Mom, you're not at that age anymore," he said at the time. I didn't argue, even though I knew in my heart that I was still perfectly capable of driving. Harold always said I was the best driver in the family, but the kids were deciding for me now. At the supermarket, I methodically went around the aisles, putting everything I needed for dinner into my cart. The cashier, a woman about my age, smiled at me. "Getting ready for something special, Mrs. Bramble?" "Family dinner," I replied, surprised that she remembered my last name. "How wonderful. My kids don't get together much, except at Christmas." I nodded understandingly. Christmas was the only holiday when my children came without any reminders or entreaties. And those visits had gotten shorter and shorter in recent years. With heavy bags, I returned home. Our home is a small two-story cottage on a quiet street in the suburbs of Plymouth. Harold and I had bought it back in the 70s when prices were much lower. Back then, we could barely afford the down payment, but Harold had always believed in real estate investing. "Son-in-law will never depreciate in value, Lou," he used to say. He turned out to be right. Our modest house was now worth several times its original price. But it wasn't just the house. Harold, who worked as a physics teacher at a local college, was a remarkably prudent man. He invested small sums in various companies, especially technology companies, when they were just starting out. By the time he left, we had a solid investment portfolio. I didn't tell my kids about money. At first, because Harold thought they should learn to work for themselves and appreciate what they earned. Then as they grew up, it just wasn't the right time. And after he died, they were too busy to really take an interest in my affairs. After sorting out my purchases, I started cooking. Roast beef took time, so I made it my first order of business. The rosemary, thyme, and garlic marinade is a recipe from my mother. I remember teaching Luella how to make it when she was a teenager. She stood by me, rolling her eyes and assuring me that she would never spend that much time cooking. "Mom, it's the 21st century. There's food delivery," she said. Luella was now feeding her daughter convenience foods and saw nothing wrong with it. As I chopped vegetables for garnish, I reflected on how relationships in our family had changed. When the kids were little, the house was always full of laughter and noise. Perry with his endless soccer practices, Luella with her books and dreams of becoming a writer. Where did those times go? When did my children become busy adults for whom a phone call to their mother was just an item on the to-do list? After Harold died, things got worse. For the first few months, they called every day, came on weekends. But gradually, the calls became less frequent, the visits shorter. They put it down to busyness, the kids, work. I understood them, I really did. Everyone has their own life. But sometimes, on particularly quiet evenings, I felt an acute sense of loneliness. I didn't think I was unhappy. I had my routine, the morning newspaper and tea, a walk to the library where I once worked, and where I still helped with cataloging books, once a week meetings with friends at the local cafe. All of these things filled the days but didn't fill the void left by family. As I prepared dessert, the same apple pie that Perry had loved so much as a child, I reflected on my savings. £900,000, a sum no one in the family had ever suspected. Harold had always said that we should live modestly but provide for the children's future. And I followed that principle all the years after his death. I lived on my teacher's pension, occasionally allowing myself small pleasures like a new dress or a ticket to a classical concert. Sometimes I wondered if the children's attitudes would have changed if they had known about the money. Would their visits be more frequent, their calls longer? But then I stopped myself. I didn't want love bought with money. I just wanted to be part of their lives, not to feel like a burden or, even worse, invisible. By 5 p.m., everything was ready. The table was set, dinner cooked, the house cleaned. I even took the time to style my hair and put on my best dress, a dark blue one with a small floral pattern. Harold always said blue accentuated the color of my eyes. The doorbell rang at 6 sharp. Perry and his family were the first to arrive. My son, a tall man with beginning gray in his dark hair, gave me a brief hug. Vanity, his wife, smacked the air next to my cheek, afraid to smudge her flawless lipstick. Jude, their 15-year-old son, mumbled a greeting without taking his eyes off the phone. Only 13-year-old Heather gave me a sincere hug, asking how I was doing. "Fine, honey," I replied, glad that at least someone in this house saw me as a person and not just an old woman. Luella and her husband and daughter arrived 15 minutes later. My daughter, always rushed and irritable, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and immediately started making excuses for being late. "Traffic was terrible, Mom, and Finley, as usual, couldn't find his keys." Finley, her husband, only smiled guiltily. A truck driver, he spent most of his time on the road and seemed happy for any opportunity to be home, even if it meant dinner at his mother-in-law's house. Abigail, their 10-year-old daughter, a quiet girl with pigtails, smiled shyly at me. She had always been shy, unlike her mother. "Come on in, everything's ready," I said, ushering them into the living room, where Perry and his family were already seated. As I watched my family seated at the table, I felt a strange mixture of joy and sadness. Here they were, my children and grandchildren, all together under one roof. And yet, as I looked at them, I couldn't escape the thought that to them I was just a background, a decoration, a necessity, not a living person with my own thoughts, feelings, and history. I brought out the roast beef and placed it in the center of the table. Perry immediately perked up, reaching for his knife. Luella started putting on a salad for Vanity, who quietly reminded her of her new diet. The kids were staring at their phones, ignoring my pleas to get them off the table. "So, how are things going at work, Perry?" I asked, trying to start a conversation. Same old, Mom," he answered, keeping his eyes on his plate. "Clients, meetings, reports, nothing interesting." "What about you, Luella?" "Busy as hell. End of the quarter, all the reports are burning up." The conversation wasn't going well. The kids were talking amongst themselves about mutual acquaintances, vacation plans, the new car Perry was going to buy. I sat at the head of the table, but I felt like I wasn't there. Finley, a kind soul, tried to include me in the conversation, asking me about my business, about the book club, about news from the neighborhood. But his questions drowned in the general noise, and soon he too gave up, focusing on his food. At one point, Abigail asked for salt, which was standing next to me. I reached out to hand it to her, but Perry beat me to it. "Mom, don't get up. You know your blood pressure isn't good," he said in the tone one uses with small children. Perry, I'm perfectly fine, I countered. Dr. Fleming said at my last checkup that I was in great shape for my age. Yeah, sure, he said. Just take care of yourself. I saw Vanity and Luella exchange glances. It was a look I'd seen many times before, a mixture of condescension and annoyance. The look that said, old people always exaggerate their health. When it came to dessert, I brought an apple pie. Placing it on the table, I looked hopefully at Perry. Your favorite, remember? He nodded absently, not taking his eyes off the phone. Yeah, thanks, Mom. Not a word about how, as a kid, he'd asked for this cake for every birthday. Not a word about how we picked apples together in the orchard behind the house that had long since been sold for development. Cutting the pie, I accidentally dropped the knife. It fell to the floor with a clatter. I'll get another one, I said, heading for the kitchen. There's no need to worry, Perry said, standing up. I'll go get it myself. You've been on your feet all day. Maybe he meant to be concerned, but there was impatience in his voice, as if my clumsiness was further confirmation that I was becoming a burden. He returned with a knife and began cutting the pie, commenting on each movement as if it were a complex operation beyond my comprehension. See, Mom, it's much more comfortable this way. You don't need too much pressure, just a smooth motion. I watched silently as he handed out the portions, feeling completely superfluous at my own table. Who wants more tea? I asked, rising. For me, please, Finley said. And me, Abigail added. I headed for the kitchen, but Perry stepped in again. Sit down, Mom. I'll do it myself. You're not a waitress after all. The room erupted in laughter. Vanity covered her mouth with her hand. Luella snorted into her napkin. Even Jude pulled away from the phone to smirk. I froze in place. Waitress. The word echoed in my head. Wasn't that what I'd been doing all these years? Serving them, cooking, cleaning, listening without even a simple thank you in return? Hadn't I become invisible, a function rather than a person? At that moment, something inside me clicked. Years of accumulated resentment, loneliness, ignoring all of it spilled out. I straightened up, feeling the blood rush to my face. You know what? I said quietly but firmly. You're right, Perry. I'm not a waitress. I'm your mother, a mother who seems to have become invisible in her own home. A tense silence hung over the table after I said that. Everyone stopped chewing and stared at me in surprise, as if they were noticing my presence for the first time. Perry coughed awkwardly, trying to lighten the mood. No, Mom, I was just kidding, he said with that condescending smile he reserved for the most intractable customers. You know we appreciate everything you do. I didn't answer, just sat back down at the table. The moment passed, and everyone was relieved to get back to dessert. Luella quickly turned the conversation to Abigail's upcoming school play, and my outburst was safely forgotten. Or they pretended to forget. It was easier that way than admitting the obvious. Abby got the part of the tree, Luella said with that special intonation that was meant to emphasize how ridiculous it was. A tree! Can you imagine? In my day, children played princesses and knights, and now they play plants. But Mom, Miss Patterson said my tree is very important, Abigail objected quietly. It symbolizes environmental issues. Of course it does, dear, Luella said. I was just hoping you'd get a part with words and not just stand there for the whole play. I saw Abigail's shoulders slump. Poor girl at 10 years old, already used to her accomplishments not being good enough for her mother. I think it's wonderful, I interjected. Trees are very important. Without them, there would be no oxygen, no shade, not even this apple pie. Abigail smiled gratefully at me, but Luella just rolled her eyes. Mom, don't start, please. I just want Abby to have every opportunity to prove herself. And the tree part, well, it's not exactly the kind of thing that opens doors. At what age do you think doors should open? I asked calmly. 10, 15, or maybe we can let kids just be kids. Mom, Perry intervened, let's not do this now. Luella just cares about Abby's future. Like you care about mine? I replied, unable to help myself. There was an awkward silence again. Vanity gave me an annoyed look and turned to Perry. Honey, tell everyone about your promotion. It's such great news. Perry perked up immediately, clearly excited about the change of subject. Yes, I've been promoted to regional director. I will now have 4 offices under my supervision. Congratulations. I said sincerely. Despite everything, I was proud of my son's success. That means we'll have to be out in the community more, Vanity said. Corporate parties, charity events. I've already ordered 3 new dresses. And a new car, Perry added with a chuckle. You can't have a regional director driving a 4-year-old sedan. What kind of car did you choose? Finley asked, the only one with a genuine interest in cars. A 7 Series BMW, Perry answered proudly. Black, with leather interior and all the options. Impressive, Finley nodded. But aren't you worried that with that long a base, it'll be hard to park in the city? For that kind of money, Finley, the car should park itself, laughed Vanity. How much is it worth? Luella asked. About 80,000, Perry said casually, as if it were a small thing. I almost choked. 80,000 pounds for a car? Harold would be rolling over in his grave. He'd always bought practical cars and only changed them when the repairs became more expensive than the new purchase. Pretty wasteful, I said, unable to help myself. Mom, I make enough money to afford a nice car, Perry said irritably. We don't all have to save money like you and Dad. Our savings paid for your education, I reminded him. Which I'm still grateful for, he added quickly. But times have changed. It's important to make an impression, to show success. And an $80,000 car is a demonstration of success? Among other things, he nodded. You know, Mom, in my world it matters what you look like, what you wear, what you drive. It's part of the game. The mine is more successful than yours game, I muttered. Don't start, please, Perry sighed. Dad and I had always disagreed about that. He thought it was a waste of money. I think of it as an investment in image. I think it's just stupid, I said. 80,000. With that money you could... What? Interrupted Vanity. Save it for a rainy day? Put it in the bank at a ridiculous interest rate? Luella, we live in the real world, not the last century. I noticed Luella and Perry exchanging glances. That poor old mom, she doesn't know anything about modern life. Look again. Speaking of money, Luella said suddenly, turning to me. Mother, I've been meaning to ask. Finley was offered a contract in Scotland for 6 months. It's a great salary, but we'll have to rent a place there, and that's an extra expense. I realized what she was getting at before she finished. We were thinking, she continued, avoiding my gaze. Maybe you could help out a little. Just a little, just to cover the first installment of rent. We'll pay it back, of course, as soon as Finley gets his first paycheck. Finley looked visibly embarrassed. He wasn't the type to ask for money, especially from his mother-in-law. How much do you need? I asked in a neutral tone. 3,000, Luella answered. 4 at the most. It's a really good opportunity for Finley, a higher position, growth prospects. I nodded silently. It wasn't the first time Luella had asked me for money, and I'd always given it. For Abigail's education, for roof repairs, for a new boiler. Small amounts from my pension that Luella said they were always going to pay back, but never did. I'll see what I can do, I said at last. Thanks, Mom, you're a real treasure, Luella exhaled with relief. Perry shook his head disapprovingly. Luella, you know Mom only has a pension. You shouldn't burden her. I'm not, Luella was indignant. It's just temporary help. Besides, Mom doesn't have the expenses we do. She lives alone, doesn't drive, doesn't like to travel. Still, Perry insisted, 4,000 is a serious sum. Says the man who's going to spend 80,000 on a car, Luella countered. With his own hard-earned money, Perry emphasized. That's enough, I interjected. I'll decide for myself if I can help Luella or not. Perry shrugged and went back to his dessert. The tension at the table could have been cut with a knife. Jude, who had been engrossed in his phone the whole time, suddenly looked up. By the way, Grandma, I need money for a new laptop for school. Mine is completely outdated. Jude! Vanity exclaimed indignantly. We discussed this at home. What? Her son looked at her innocently. Dad said there's no money now because of the new car and your dresses. And Grandma always helps. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. Is that how they see me? A cash machine for emergency expenses? Jude, apologize to Grandma, Perry said sternly. For what? The boy was genuinely surprised. Did I say something that wasn't true? You're the one who keeps saying that Grandma is still saving up for a rainy day that will never come. There was dead silence. Perry and Vanity looked like they wanted to fall through the ground. Luella fidgeted nervously with her napkin. Jude, that's enough, Perry finally said. One more word and you'll be without a cell phone for a week. The teenager snorted but stopped talking, staring at the screen again. I sat there stunned, digesting what I'd heard. Is this how they discuss me behind my back? An old cheapskate who's saving up for who knows what? If they only knew. Would anyone else like some tea? I asked, trying to lighten the mood. Yes, please, Heather said, the only one who seemed genuinely embarrassed. I got up and headed for the kitchen, my hands shaking. Behind my back, the conversation turned to more neutral topics. The weather, the latest movies, Perry and Vanity's upcoming vacation in Spain. In the kitchen, I leaned against the countertop, breathing deeply. Years of hurt and disappointment came over me in a wave. I remembered how, after Harold died, I'd had to deal with all the paperwork, the insurance, the inheritance all by myself. How the kids had promised to help, but always found reasons to postpone the visit. How Perry insisted on selling Dad's collection of antique clocks so as not to clutter up the house. How Luella suggested we move to a nursing home, where you'll be taken care of better than we can. I opened the top cabinet where I kept my tea, and my gaze fell on a photograph magnetically attached to the refrigerator. Harold and I on our ruby wedding day, 40 years together. His eyes full of love and pride. You are my greatest treasure, Lou, he told me then. What would he say now, seeing how our children treat his treasure? I made tea, trying to calm myself down. Maybe I'm being too hard on them? After all, they have their own lives, their own problems. Maybe I'm expecting too much? But then I remembered how I had taken care of my mother until her last days, how I never considered it a burden, even when I had to be torn between work, children, and caring for her. I didn't ask for gratitude. I did it out of love. Do I ask for more for my children? With a tray of tea, I returned to the dining room. The conversation was about the upcoming school festival where Heather was to perform in the choir. Grandma, are you coming to hear me? She asked as I set the cup down in front of her. Of course, dear, I smiled. I haven't missed a single one of your performances. Just don't forget to bring a sweater, Vanity intervened. It's always cold in the auditorium, and with your arthritis— I don't have arthritis, I interrupted. My joints are fine. But last time you complained of knee pain, Luella reminded me. It was a temporary pain after working in the garden all day, I explained. It happens to everyone, no matter how old they are. Of course, Mom, Luella nodded indulgently. But still, take care of yourself. At your age, you have to be careful. At your age. Another phrase I've heard so often in recent years. You can't drive at my age. You can't work in the garden at my age. You can't travel alone at my age. At my age, you should consider moving to a more suitable place. Could you pass me the sugar bowl? I asked Perry, deciding to change the subject. He reached for the sugar bowl, but instead of just handing it over, he put it right in front of my cup and put the sugar in front of me. One spoonful for you, right? You can't take much more with your blood pressure. That was the last straw, the sugar bowl. Such a small thing, but it embodied everything, their condescension, their certainty that I was incapable of taking care of myself, their total disregard for my independence. I'm perfectly capable of putting my own sugar in, I said, pushing his hand away. And decide how much I need. I'm just trying to help, Perry defended himself. No, you're trying to control, I countered, like you always do. Mom, Luella sighed. Let's not start that again. Perry just cares about you. Caring looks different, I said firmly. Caring is respect. Caring is taking an interest in my life, not just my health and ability to serve you. What are you talking about? Perry frowned. That I've become invisible to you, I replied. A person with no desires, no opinions, no feelings of my own. I'm either poor old mom who needs help or a convenient ATM when you need money. That's not fair, Luella exclaimed. We love you. Love you? I grinned bitterly. When was the last time you asked me how I spend my days? What do I do? What I think about? You come when you need something, call when you want me to babysit, and the rest of the time I don't exist for you. There was a heavy silence. The children looked at me in amazement as if they were seeing me for the first time. And now, I continued, my heart pounding, you, Perry, call me a waitress. And everybody laughs, because to you, I am a waitress. I cook, I clean, I give you money when you ask for it, and I should be grateful that you sometimes take the time to drop in for dinner. Mother, I didn't mean it that way, Perry began to defend himself. It was just a silly joke. Jokes often reveal true thoughts, I pointed out. And you know what the sad part is? I've let this happen for so long. I was afraid of losing even the crumbs of attention I was getting from you. You're being dramatic, Vanity interjected. Perry and Luella are always looking out for you. Who helped you fix the bathroom? Who takes you to the doctor? Yes, they do. And every time they let me know what a favor it is, I replied. Every time they remind me how grateful I should be for their time. I looked at my grandchildren. Jude and Heather looked embarrassed. Abigail looked scared. I felt sorry for them. They weren't to blame for their parents' behavior. I've been thinking about this for a long time, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. About what was happening to our family, about what Harold would have wanted. And I've made a decision. What decision? Perry asked warily. I took a deep breath. What I was about to say would change everything, but perhaps it was necessary. I've decided to donate all my savings, £900,000, to a charity for the elderly. There was a stunned silence. Luella dropped her fork, which clattered to the plate. Perry froze with his mouth open. Vanity went pale. 900,000? Perry finally squeezed out. You have £900,000? Yes, I confirmed. Your father's investment has been very successful. I never told you about it because Harold believed that money shouldn't affect family relationships. He wanted you to learn to earn your own living, not rely on an inheritance. And you're going to give it all away? Luella gasped. All of Daddy's inheritance? Our inheritance? I corrected. And yes, I'm going to give it to people who really need help. Older people who have been abandoned by their families, or who never had the chance to save enough for a decent old age. There was a sepulchral silence in the dining room. My words about the £900,000 and the charity hung in the air, heavy and palpable. I watched my children's faces change from shock to disbelief, from disbelief to realization, and finally to poorly concealed panic. Luella was the first to come to her senses. She pushed her plate away and nervously tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture she'd adopted from me as a teenager. Mom, you're kidding, right? Her voice was quiet, almost pleading. Is this some kind of prank? I shook my head, feeling strangely calm, as if the weight I'd been carrying for years had finally fallen from my shoulders. No, Luella, I'm perfectly serious. Perry, always quick to recover from surprises, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms over his chest. His posture was relaxed, but I could see the tension in his eyes. Mom, let's talk about this reasonably, he said in the same tone I was sure he used to negotiate with clients. $900,000 is a lot of money. You don't make decisions like that spontaneously over dinner. It's not a spontaneous decision, I replied. I've been thinking about it for a long time. And you were never going to discuss it with us? Vanity intervened, her voice shaking with barely restrained indignation. We are family after all. I looked at her with a slight smile. Vanity, when you and Perry decided to buy a new car for £80,000, did you discuss it with me? She opened her mouth to object, but closed it without saying anything. You see, I continued, it's my money, just like your dresses and Perry's car are your decisions. Finley, who had been silent until that moment, coughed quietly, drawing attention. Luella, he began cautiously, I understand your feelings, but perhaps you should think it over again, for the grandchildren's sake, if not for ours. I looked at him gratefully. Finley had always been the voice of reason in the family, the man who sought to smooth out the rough edges. I understand your concern, Finley, but my decision does not directly affect my grandchildren. If Harold and I wanted to leave the money directly to them, we would have set up a trust. 900,000, Luella murmured, as if still in disbelief. You've had 900,000 all these years, and you've been living on your pension and asking me to bring medicine from the drugstore because it's £2 cheaper? Frugality is a habit, I shrugged, and a principle. Harold and I never believed in waste. But to give everything to charity, Perry exclaimed. That's not frugality. That's... It's my decision, I said firmly. And it's final. No, Luella shook her head. No, you can't do this. That money. It has to stay in the family. Daddy would want it to. Daddy would want our family to stay a family, I argued. That we take care of each other not because of money, but because we love each other. We love you, Luella exclaimed, her eyes filling with tears. How can you doubt that? I don't doubt that somewhere deep inside you do love me, I replied softly. But that love hasn't shown itself in your actions in recent years. That's not fair, Perry interjected. We've always cared for you. Maybe not the way you wanted us to, but we did the best we could. We did what we could without compromising our plans, I clarified. Without sacrificing our comfort. Vanity stood up abruptly, her chair pulling back with a loud creak. I'm not going to listen to this, she said. You're accusing us of being bad children to justify your decision to disinherit us. It's manipulation, pure manipulation. Sit down, Vanity, Perry said quietly, but his voice was steely. Mother, you realize what this looks like, don't you? You announce the existence of a huge sum of money we didn't know existed, and then you say you're going to give it all to charity because we supposedly treated you badly. That's blackmail. I felt my heart sink. Did he really think that? That I'm trying to blackmail them? It's not blackmail, Perry. It's consequences. Consequences of what? Luella was outraged. That we live our lives? That we have jobs, children, obligations? That we can't spend every minute with you? No, I answered calmly. The consequences of you no longer seeing me as a person. The fact that you decide for me what I need without asking my opinion. The fact that you only think of me when you need something. It's not fair, repeated Luella, unable to hold back her tears. We have always cared for you. As a child or as a feeble old woman, I answered. But not as an adult with her own desires and right to respect. Heather, who had been silently observing the adult squabble, suddenly intervened. Grandmother is right, she said quietly but firmly. You're really treating her that way. All heads turned to the 13-year-old girl, who suddenly looked much older than her years. Heather, this is an adult conversation, Vanity began, but her daughter interrupted her. I'm old enough to see how you treat Grandma. You always talk down to her as if she doesn't understand anything about the modern world. You're always deciding for her, even today with the sugar. She turned to her father. Dad, you didn't ask how much sugar she wanted. You just decided for her. Perry looked like he'd been punched. Luella was nervously rubbing her napkin without looking up. Vanity looked at her daughter like she was seeing her for the first time. And you know what else? Heather continued, turning to her mother. You're always saying that Grandma needs to socialize more, to get out of the house. But when she offered to go to Spain with us last summer, you said it was a family vacation. I looked at my granddaughter in amazement. I never thought she noticed all these little things, all these little neglects and rejections. Heather, that's enough, Perry said sternly. You don't understand the whole situation. I understand enough, the girl replied, crossing her arms over her chest, just as her father had done when he was her age. I understand that you're upset not because Grandma is offended, but because you won't get the money. That's not true, Vanity exclaimed. We are concerned about Grandma's welfare. Then why don't you ever ask how she really is? Heather parried. Why do you always say yes, yes, of course, when she talks about her book club or her trip to London? Yeah, Vanity stammered, unable to find the words. I put my hand on Heather's shoulder. Thank you, dear, but I think your parents and I need to discuss this amongst ourselves. Heather nodded but didn't move, silently showing her support. I felt a rush of love for this brave, observant girl. A heavy silence hung in the room. Finally, Perry took a deep breath and spoke again, much softer this time. Mother, I realize that we may not have always treated you with the respect you deserve. And if that's the case, I sincerely apologize. But the decision to give away all the money, it's too drastic. Maybe we can find a compromise. What kind of compromise do you suggest? I asked, looking at my son carefully. Well, maybe you could give some to charity and leave some to the family, he suggested. Or set up a family foundation that we could manage together. I shook my head. It's not about money, Perry. It's about relationships. It's about respect. It's about a love that shows itself not just in words, but in actions. What do you want us to do? Luella asked, wiping away her tears. Do you want us to quit our jobs and sit at your feet? Do you want us to call you every day? What do you want? I want you to see me, I answered simply. Not as a source of money or favors, not as a burden or a problem to be solved, but as a person. As your mother who loves you and is proud of you and wants to be a part of your life. And if we start doing that, will you change your mind about money? Perry asked, and I noticed Luella cast a warning glance at him. See? I smiled sadly. You're still thinking about the money, not what I'm trying to say. No, He started, but I held up my hand to stop him. I realize that my decision seems sudden and unfair to you. So I propose this. I will take no action for 6 months. During that time, we can all think, you about our relationship, me about my decision. 6 months? Luella interjected. And then what? Then I'll decide whether to give all the money to charity or split it between you. And how will you decide if we deserve an inheritance? Perry asked, bitterness slipping into his voice. Do you have some sort of scale or list of requirements? There's no scale, Perry, I replied. I just want to see that our relationship can change, that we can get back the respect and love we once had for each other. And if we don't live up to your expectations? Vanity asked. If you decide we haven't changed enough, then the money will go to charity, I said firmly. And maybe that would be for the best. Because a relationship built on financial interest isn't worth keeping. Finley, who had been listening intently throughout the conversation, finally spoke again. I think it's fair, he said. 6 months is plenty of time for everyone to cool down and think. And frankly, regardless of the money, we really should reevaluate our relationship. Luella gave her husband a disapproving look but didn't say anything. There is one more thing, I added. I'm going to Eleanor's for a while. Aunt Ellie? Luella was surprised. To Cornwall? Yes, I nodded. My sister's been asking me to go for a long time, and now would be a good time, I thought. We all need space to think. You're just running away, Perry said. You drop that bomb and run away so you don't have to see the consequences. No, Perry, I shook my head. I'm giving us all a chance to look at the situation from the outside, without the daily reminders and resentments, so we can decide what's really important. How long do you plan to stay there? Luella asked. Most of those 6 months, I answered. Maybe not the whole time, but enough time to think things over. The grandchildren, who had been silently listening to the adults' conversation, now looked at me anxiously. Will you be coming for the weekend? Abigail asked, her voice trembling. Will you come to my play? I walked over to her and gave her a hug. Of course, sweetheart. I promise I'll come to your play. And we'll talk on the phone and I'll write you letters. Real paper letters like in the old days. I'll write you letters too, she whispered, hugging me tightly. Heather followed, tears in her eyes. I don't want you to leave, Grandma. I know, dear. I stroked her head. But sometimes distance helps you see things more clearly. And it won't be forever, I promise. Jude, who had been defiantly not participating in the conversation all this time, suddenly looked up from the phone. When are you leaving? He asked, trying to sound indifferent, but I could hear the worry in his voice. At the end of the week, I answered. I have some things I need to take care of before I leave. So soon? Luella looked shocked. You've already planned everything? I've been thinking about it for a while, I admitted. And I decided that if tonight's dinner went as well as usual, I'd take these steps. So this was all a test? Perry was outraged. You gave us a test and we failed it? No, Perry, I shook my head. It was just another family dinner. I'd hoped it would be different, but I wasn't surprised when it went the way it did. And my waitress joke was the last straw? He asked, and for the first time there was genuine regret in his voice. Not the joke itself, I replied. It was the way everyone reacted to it. The way you didn't see anything wrong with talking to your mother like that. The way the others laughed as if it were normal. Perry lowered his eyes, and I saw the color of shame flood his face. He'd always been a proud boy, hating to admit his mistakes. But now, I think my words finally got through to him. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I shouldn't have said that. Thank you, I nodded. That's a good start. Luella, who still looked shocked, stood up suddenly. I need some air, she said, and quickly left the room. Finley threw me an apologetic look and followed his wife. Vanity sat clutching her napkin, her face pale and tense. What are we going to tell people? She asked at last. When they find out you've left? I grinned. Of course, Vanity was worried about what others would think, about how it would affect their reputation. Tell the truth, I replied, that I decided to spend some time with my sister. It's not a lie or a reason to gossip. Perry sighed and rubbed his face with his hands, a gesture he'd learned from Harold. All right, he said at last. 6 months. Time to think. I understand. But Mother, please don't make a final decision without hearing us out again. I promise, I nodded. The decision will only be made after we talk again. Perry nodded, then stood up and began to gather up the plates, the first time he'd done that in years that I could remember. Leave them, I said. I'll clean up later. No, he shook his head. I'll help. It's the least I can do. As I watched my son, always so confident and independent, methodically picking up the dishes from the table, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope. Maybe this evening had really made a difference. Perhaps we all needed this shock to see what our relationship had become. Through the open door, I could see Luella standing in the garden with her arms wrapped around herself, and Finley saying something quietly to her, putting a hand on her shoulder. My daughter has always been harder to penetrate than Perry. She inherited not only blonde hair from Harold, but also stubbornness and pride. I knew that the coming months would be difficult for all of us, that my decision would cause many more arguments and accusations, that the road to repairing our relationship, if at all possible, would be long and difficult. But for the first time in a long time, I felt truly listened to, that my words had weight, that I was visible to my family again. And as I watched Perry clumsily load the dishwasher, as Heather helped him, patiently showing him where to put things, as Jude, trying to be inconspicuous, picked up the rest of the dishes from the table, I allowed myself a little hope that maybe all was not yet lost. Abigail came over to me and took my hand. Grandma, she said softly, I'm going to miss you. Me too, sweetheart, I replied, squeezing her small hand. But sometimes we need to be apart for a while to realize how much we love each other. Like in that book you used to read to me, about the bear cub who goes into the woods to learn how to be brave? I smiled, touched that she remembered our reading together. Yes, honey, very much so. Sometimes we all need a little time in the woods to find our courage. And will you come back braver? She asked. I hope we all come back braver, I replied, looking over her shoulder at my children, who were awkwardly trying to tidy up the kitchen, clearly unaccustomed to this kind of work. Braver and maybe a little wiser. Cornwall greeted me with sunshine and sea breeze. Eleanor, my younger sister, was waiting on the platform of the little station in Penzance, waving her arms as if I might not notice her bright red scarf and mop of silver hair, always energetic and bright, the exact opposite of my restraint. Lou! She hugged me with such force that I almost dropped my bag. You've made up your mind at last. I thought I was going to have to come and kidnap you. I laughed, feeling the tension of the last few days begin to let go. After that memorable dinner, a week passed, filled with awkward phone conversations and surprise visits from the kids, who clearly didn't know how to react to my departure and the announcement of the inheritance. Perry came twice to see if everything was okay, even though he was actually trying to convince me to change my mind. Luella called every day, her voice wavering between irritation and feigned concern. Only the grandchildren acted sincere. Abigail cried when she came to say goodbye. Heather brought a handmade card, and Jude, to my surprise, hugged me for a long time, mumbling something about writing me emails. You look exhausted, Ellie said, taking my bag from me. What did those kids do to you? Nothing much, I sighed, following her to the old Fiat. They were just being themselves. On the way to Eleanor's house, I told her everything that had happened. About how I'd felt invisible for years, about Perry's joke about the waitress, about my decision about the money, about the shocked looks on the kids' faces. It's about time you showed them where it's at, Ellie nodded approvingly, speeding away from the tractor. I always said you spoil them too much. Harold's turned them into spoiled princes and princesses with all that talk of a decent future. Don't say that about Harold, I rebuked her gently. He meant well. Of course he did, she snorted. Like all parents do. But sometimes best means letting your kids get their own bumps rather than clearing the path for them. She was right about something. Harold and I had always tried to make life easier for our children, to protect them from the hardships we'd gone through ourselves. Maybe that was our mistake. Eleanor's house, a small stone cottage on the outskirts of the village, looked exactly as it had in the photographs she'd sent. Ivy covered, with brightly colored flowers in the front garden and a view of the sea in the distance. Inside was a creative mess that reflected her personality. Books, paintings, handmade ceramics, and a collection of seashells from around the world. Make yourself comfortable, Ellie said, showing me to a room on the second floor. I cleared out an entire dresser for you, though knowing your love of minimalism, I doubt you'd need all that space. I smiled as I unpacked. Indeed, I'd brought only the essentials. A habit of frugality, ingrained from years of teachers' paychecks and a quiet life with Harold. I have big plans for you, sis, Ellie announced over dinner, pouring red wine into glasses. Beaches, museums, galleries, local farmers markets, and no talking about your ungrateful children unless you want to. Thus began my escape from my family and my past life. The first few days I felt strange, almost guilty for enjoying the freedom and peace. I woke up thinking I should call the kids to see if everything was okay, remind Luella about her dental appointment, or ask Perry how his important meeting went. But then I remembered that I didn't have to do that anymore, that my time was mine alone now. Eleanor, unlike my children, didn't try to control my every move. She suggested, but never insisted. Do you want to come to the beach with me? No? Fine. Then I'll see you tonight. No resentful sighs, no accusations, no pressure. I had forgotten what it felt like to have your decisions respected, not questioned. On my third week in Cornwall, Perry called. His voice sounded strained with barely contained irritation. Mom, how are you? Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Perry. Ellie's showing me the local sights. We were at Treba Gardens yesterday, an incredibly beautiful place. That's good, he paused. Listen, I've been talking to a lawyer. Why? I interrupted. Well, about your decision about the money. He said that if Dad didn't leave clear instructions about the inheritance, then legally. Perry, my voice grew colder. Dad left everything to me. No strings attached, no strings attached. What I decide to do with that money is my business. But it's family money, his voice rose. Dad always said that savings are for the family, for future generations. Yes, for the family, I agreed. But family is more than just a bank account. It's about relationships, respect, caring. That's what I was talking about at dinner. So you're manipulating us after all, he said bitterly. Using money to make us do your bidding. I sighed. Perry had always been stubborn, always thought he knew best. When he was a kid, it was in the smallest things, refusing to wear a hat in the cold, insisting on his route to school even if it was longer. Now that stubbornness has become part of his personality. No, Perry, I'm not forcing anyone to dance. I just want you to think about how we communicate. I want you to see me not as an ATM machine or a maid, but as a human being. That's not fair, he exclaimed. We have never treated you as a servant. You called me a waitress not so long ago, I reminded him. It was a silly joke. Are you going to disinherit us because of one bad joke? No, Perry. Not because of a joke, because of years of neglect and disrespect. Because I've become invisible in your life, a convenient grandmother who babysits, lends money, and never complains. There was a silence. I could hear him breathing hard, trying to control his anger. Okay, he said at last. I get it. 6 months. We'll see what happens after that. After that conversation, Perry didn't call for 3 weeks. But Luella began to call more often. Unlike her brother, she seemed genuinely concerned. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, she admitted in one conversation. And maybe you're right. We did take you for granted. Thank you for admitting that, I said, surprised by her candor. Finley feels the same way. He said he always felt we weren't paying enough attention to you, but he was afraid to interfere, she paused. And there's one more thing. Abigail misses you. She asks every day when you're coming back. My heart squeezed. Of all the grandchildren, Abigail had always been the most attached to me. A quiet, thoughtful girl, so much like me at her age. I miss her too, I admitted. Tell her I'll be sure to come to her play like I promised. It's in 2 weeks, Luella said. Are you sure you can make it? It's a long way. I promised, I said firmly, and I'll keep my word. After that conversation, I noticed a change in the tone of our conversations with Luella. She began to talk more about herself, about her difficulties at work, about how difficult it was to combine career and motherhood. For the first time in a long time, she spoke to me as an equal, as someone who could understand and sympathize, not just as a mother who needed to report on the past week. She even asked my advice about Abigail once. She's so quiet, Mom. Sometimes I worry there's something wrong with her. Other girls her age are so outgoing, and she prefers to sit with a book. I smiled, remembering little Luella, who loved to read too. She's just different, sweetie. Just like you were at her age. Remember how you used to hide in the closet with a flashlight to finish a book after lights out? Do you? Luella sounded surprised. I don't remember that. Oh, you were just as quiet and thoughtful. And then in middle school, you suddenly became outgoing and active. People change. I never thought about it, she admitted. About being like Abby. I guess that's why it's so hard for me to understand her sometimes. Or maybe that's why you worry about her more than you should, I said softly. Because you remember what it was like to be different. That night, our conversation dragged on for an hour. We talked about her childhood, about mine, about the difficulties of parenting, about fears and hopes. It was the longest and most sincere conversation we'd had in years. Meanwhile, my life in Cornwall was taking on new colors. Eleanor, who never sat still, involved me in various activities. We went to the beach to collect shells, visited local galleries and markets, and cooked new meals together. She even convinced me to try yoga for seniors led by her friend Margaret. You're frozen in your role as the sacrificial mother, Ellie said over breakfast one day. It's time to remember that you're also a woman, a person, a human being with desires of your own. And what are my desires? I asked with a smile. How should I know? Shrugged her shoulders. That's for you to find out. What have you always wanted to do but put off until later? What places have you dreamed of seeing? What skills did you want to learn? I wondered. Indeed, over the years of taking care of my family, work, and household responsibilities, I had almost forgotten about my own interests. When was the last time I did something purely for myself without thinking of the benefit to my children, grandchildren, or home? I've always wanted to learn to take pictures, I admitted. Harold gave me a camera for our silver anniversary, but I never took the time to figure out how it worked. Great, Ellie glowed. Our community center has a beginner's photography class. I'll sign you up. So I began to learn the art of photography under the tutelage of Benjamin, an energetic 70-year-old former photojournalist. He taught me to see the beauty in ordinary things, to capture the moment, to play with light and shadow. For the first time in a long time, I felt the excitement and joy of learning something new. I forgot about time, wandering along the beach with my camera, looking for interesting angles and details. Weekly yoga classes also brought unexpected joy. Margaret, a woman my age with a waist-length braid and inexhaustible energy, convinced us that the body is a temple, and no temple is too old for repair. After classes, we often stayed to chat over tea, and I gradually formed new acquaintances and even friendships. One day, while looking through my photos, I came across a shot of the sunset sky over the sea that was particularly good. Without hesitation, I emailed it to Jude. He had always been interested in art, though he hid it under a mask of teenage indifference. To my surprise, he responded almost immediately. Cool, Grandma. Did you take the picture yourself? What filter did you use? Thus began our correspondence. I told him about my photographic experiments. He shared his tips on processing images in some applications I had never even heard of. It was a new, unexpected rapprochement based on shared interest rather than family obligations. In one of the letters, Jude asked out of the blue, Grandma, has Daddy always been so, control freak? I thought for a long time before answering. I didn't want to say anything bad about Perry, but I didn't want to lie to my grandson either. Your dad was always very responsible, I finally wrote. Even as a child, he felt the need to be in control. I think it's his way of taking care of those he loves. although sometimes that care can seem excessive. He's freaking out about you leaving, Jude replied. All the time he says you're being irresponsible and selfish. And Mom says you have a right to live your life. They argue about it all the time. This message took me by surprise. I hadn't expected my departure to cause such a disagreement between Perry and Vanity. She usually supported all of his decisions, at least publicly. Meanwhile, my visit to Abigail's school play was approaching. I'd booked train tickets and even bought a new dress, a navy blue one with a silver leaf brooch that Ellie had given me. To fit the role of Abby, she joked, reminding me that my granddaughter plays a tree. Luella called almost every day, reminding me of the details of the play, what time it started and what seats she had reserved. Her voice sounded nervous, like she was afraid I wouldn't show up. Mom, are you sure you can make it on your own? Maybe Finley can pick you up at the station? Luella, I'm perfectly capable of taking a cab, I reminded her gently. I've done it all my life. Of course, it's just, she stammered. I'm worried. On the day of the play, I arrived in Plymouth early in the morning. It was strange to see the city that had been my home for decades through the eyes of a visitor. Everything seemed both familiar and foreign at the same time. I checked into a small hotel near Abigail's school, paying for a room in my hometown for the first time in my life. It was a strange but liberating feeling. I was no longer tied to home, to routine, to the expectations of family. I was free to do what I wanted, and it was both frightening and delightful. The play started at 6 in the evening. I arrived half an hour in advance as Luella had advised, and took my seat in the third row. Soon Luella and Finley appeared, both looking tense. Mama! Luella gave me an unexpectedly warm hug. You look beautiful. Cornwall is clearly doing you good. Thank you, dear, I smiled. The sea air does wonders. And a new dress? She remarked with surprise. Very elegant. I thought I'd treat myself. I nodded. Finley hugged me warmly. It's good to see you, Luella. The house isn't the same without you. It's not my home anymore, Finley, I reminded him gently. At least not yet. Luella started to say something else, but she was interrupted by the arrival of Perry and his family. My son looked surprised to see me. Mama, you came after all. I promised Abigail, I replied simply. Vanity smiled strainedly, and Heather rushed over to me with a hug. Grandma, I missed you so much, she exclaimed. Did you get my letters? Of course, dear, I hugged her back. And your drawings are beautiful. I hung them in Aunt Ellie's room. Jude, who was standing behind everyone, waved awkwardly at me. I smiled at him, and he smiled back slightly. Our little secret, our new connection through pictures and emails. The play was endearing in its naivety and sincerity. Children ranging in age from 8 to 11 told a story about the importance of conservation. Abigail, in a tree costume, stood at the center of the stage, proudly raising her branching arms. At a key moment, she delivered a monologue on behalf of the disappearing forest, a few simple but poignant phrases that she had learned perfectly. I noticed Luella brushing away a tear as she listened to her daughter. Maybe she finally saw that the role of the tree was as important as any other. After the play, we all waited for Abigail in the lobby. When she appeared, still in makeup, with leaves painted on her cheeks, I was the first to approach her with a bouquet of wildflowers. You were gorgeous, Sunshine, I said, hugging her. The most beautiful and important tree I've ever seen. Really? Her eyes shone. Do you really think so, Grandma? Absolutely. Without you, the whole show would fall apart. Luella followed, her face glowing with pride. Mom's right, Abby. You were amazing. I'm so proud of you. I looked at my daughter in surprise. No comment that the monologue was too short or that the costume could have been better. Just sincere, unconditional praise. We all went together to a pizza place near the school, a tradition after each of Abigail's performances. At the table, the conversation didn't go well at first. Perry was silent, Vanity watching the kids intently, Luella trying to make small talk. How are you enjoying Cornwall, Mother? She asked at last. Is Ellie driving you crazy with her crazy ideas? I smiled, remembering our last crazy idea, a nighttime stargazing photo shoot on the beach. Actually, I like her crazy ideas. They make me want to try new things. Like what? Finley asked with genuine interest. I've started learning how to take pictures, I replied. And I do yoga twice a week. Yoga? Perry finally broke the silence, his voice filled with disbelief. At your age? At my age, Perry. Yoga is especially good for me, I said calmly. It helps with flexibility and balance. My grandmother sends me pictures of herself, Jude said, making everyone turn to look at him. They're really cool. Really? Vanity looked surprised. You never said anything about that. Jude shrugged, clearly embarrassed by the sudden attention. Gran is good at taking pictures of the sea and sunsets, he said. She has an eye for detail. Perry looked at his son, then at me, his face a mixture of surprise and something else, maybe a slight resentment. I didn't know you two were in touch, he said. We exchange emails, I replied. Jude gives me advice on processing photos. And I want to see your pictures too, Grandma, Heather exclaimed. May I? Of course, dear. I'll send you some special ones I took just for you. Dinner continued in a more relaxed atmosphere. I talked about Cornwall, the new friends I'd made, my plans to attend the local arts festival. The children listened with interest and asked questions, and even Perry gradually thawed and joined in the conversation. When it was time to say goodbye, Luella took me aside. Mom, I was wondering, do you want to stop by the house? Just to see how things are? I watered the flowers like you asked and picked up the mail. Thank you, dear, but I think it's best not to do that just yet, I said. I'm going back to Cornwall tomorrow morning, maybe next time. She nodded, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. We miss you, Mom, she said quietly. All of us. Even Perry, though he's too stubborn to admit it. I know, I replied softly. And I miss you too. But we all need this time. To think, to reevaluate, to maybe learn to see each other in a new way. She nodded, gave me a sudden hug, and quickly turned away, hiding her tears. As I drove back to the hotel, I thought about how my children had changed over the months. Luella was softer, more attentive, less focused on her own problems and more on the feelings of others. Perry was still stubborn and reserved, but I could see an uncertainty in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Maybe for the first time in his life, he was doubting his own righteousness. The 6 months flew by. Living in Cornwall with Eleanor was not just a respite, but a real discovery of new opportunities, new interests, new friends. I discovered talents I didn't even know I had, and the courage to try things I'd never thought possible before. My photo exhibition at the local gallery was a small event in the life of the village. Benjamin, my photography teacher, insisted that I show my work to the public. You have a special eye, Luella, he said. You see beauty where others pass by? 12 of my photographs, seascapes, details of old buildings, portraits of local people, hung on the walls of the small showroom for a month. To my surprise, 3 of them were even bought. I sent invitations to the exhibition to my children, not really hoping anyone would come. Distance, work, the kids' school, there were always reasons. But suddenly, Luella and Abigail arrived. They spent the day looking at my photos, walking along the beach, getting to know Eleanor and her friends. I've never seen you like this, Mom, Luella said as we sat on the veranda of Ellie's house, watching the sunset. So, alive, free. I haven't seen myself like this in a long time, I admitted. During my last week in Cornwall, Eleanor threw a farewell dinner. She invited all my new friends, Benjamin and his wife Grace, Margaret from the yoga class, neighbors, and other photography students. We sat in her garden under garlands of lights, ate homemade food, drank wine, and talked about future plans. So are you really going back to Plymouth? Margaret asked, handing me a plate of salad. After all you've told me about your family? Yes, I nodded. It was time. 6 months are up and I have to keep my word. What about the money? Eleanor asked me bluntly. My sister was never very tactful. Have you decided what you will do with the inheritance? I sighed. It was a question that had been on my mind for weeks. A lot had changed in 6 months. Luella had started calling regularly, inquiring not only about my health but also about my new hobbies. Perry was reserved at first, but gradually his calls became more open. We even argued a few times, a real argument like equals, not the kind where he condescended to dismiss my opinions. I haven't made up my mind yet, I said, but I think I'll split the money. Some of it will go to my children and grandchildren, some to charity. And some for you, Eleanor said firmly. Don't forget yourself, Lou. You've earned the right to live the life you want. The day I left, Eleanor drove me to the station. We stood on the platform and I felt a strange mixture of sadness and anticipation. Don't let them turn you into a shadow again, my sister said, hugging me tightly. You've lived for others for too long. It's time to live for yourself. I promise, I smiled. And I'll be back. Now I had a reason to come to Cornwall. On the train, I thought about my upcoming family reunion. We'd agreed to meet at my house, the first time I'd been back there in 6 months. According to Luella, the children took turns keeping an eye on the house, watering the flowers, making sure everything was in order. It was already a change. Before, all the household tasks had fallen on my shoulders alone. Plymouth greeted me with overcast skies and drizzling rain. Typical English weather, which I had strangely missed in sunny Cornwall. The cab stopped in front of my house, and I was surprised to see the lights on in the windows. Someone was already inside. Opening the door with my key, I heard voices and laughter from the kitchen. Leaving my suitcase in the hallway, I headed over there and froze in the doorway, not believing my eyes. My whole family was here. Perry and Vanity, Luella and Finley, all 3 grandchildren. They bustled around the table, setting plates and glasses. Something smelled delicious in the oven, and there was a vase of wildflowers, my favorite. Heather was the first to notice me. "Grandma," she exclaimed, rushing over to me with a hug. "You're back." Everyone turned around, and there was silence for a moment. Then Luella came over and hugged me, followed by Abigail and even Jude, who usually avoided affection. "Welcome home, Mom," Luella said, and I noticed the tears in her eyes. Finley was smiling at the stove, Vanity was nervously adjusting the napkins on the table, and only Perry remained where he was, looking at me with an unreadable expression. "What's this all about?" I asked, glancing around the kitchen. "A dinner to celebrate your return," Luella answered. "We wanted to give you a proper welcome. I made your favorite roast beef," Finley said. "It's your recipe, though not as good as yours, I'm afraid." "And I made apple pie," Vanity added. And I couldn't hide my surprise. Vanity, who always prided herself on not cooking, preferring restaurants and delivery, made a pie. "Cinnamon and raisins, just the way you like it," she explained, noticing my surprise. Heather helped. "Thank you." I was touched by their efforts. "It's unexpected." Perry finally approached me. He looked tense, like he was preparing for something difficult. "Mom," he began, and I noticed that his voice trembled slightly. "We're all very glad you're back. And before we sit down to dinner, there's something I'd like to say." He took a deep breath. "I want to apologize for everything, for the way I've treated you over the years, for not seeing you, not hearing you, not respecting you, for thinking my problems were more important than yours, for taking your love and care for granted." I stared at him in silence, not believing my ears. Perry, my proud, stubborn son who never admitted his mistakes, stood before me and apologized. "Those 6 months made me rethink a lot of things," he continued. "I realized that I had been selfish, that I had treated you not as a human being with your own desires and rights, but as a function, a mom who should always be there for you, always willing to help, never complaining." He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. And I realized something else. I was afraid that you'd become dependent on us, that your health would deteriorate, that you'd need care. So I tried to control everything you did, how much sugar you put in your tea, whether you drove your car, whether you went out in the rain without an umbrella. It was my way of dealing with the fear of losing you. "Perry," I started, but he shook his head. "Let me finish, please. This is important." He took another deep breath. "When you left, I was angry. I thought you were manipulating us, blackmailing us, but then I started to notice how empty it was without you. Not just at home, but in our lives. And it wasn't about the money, I swear. It was about you being the heart of our family. You always have been, and we just didn't see it." Now I was fighting back tears. My heart was pounding and my throat was lumpy. "I'm sorry, Mom. Perry finished. I'm sorry for everything. And know that no matter what you decide about the money, I love you. We all do. I hugged him silently, unable to speak. My son, my complicated, proud boy, finally saw me. Really saw me. When we pulled away from each other, I noticed that everyone else was furtively wiping away tears too. Even Jude, who was pretending to be very busy on his phone, was sniffling suspiciously. Thank you, Perry, I said finally. It means a lot to me. Let's sit down, Luella suggested, breaking the emotional moment. Everything's ready, and the roast beef will be cold. We settled at the table, and I was surprised to find myself sitting not at the head, serving and serving, but on the side as a guest. Finley and Luella put the food on plates. Perry opened the wine. Vanity set the glasses. Everything was happening without my participation, not because I was being ignored, but because they wanted me to rest. Dinner passed in a warm, relaxed atmosphere. We talked about my life in Cornwall, about photos, about new friends. The children talked about their affairs, without the usual complaints and drama, just sharing the news. The grandchildren talked excitedly about school and their projects and plans. After dessert, apple pie, which to my surprise was almost as good as my own, Luella poured tea, and the conversation inevitably turned to what everyone was thinking. Mother, she began cautiously, we'd all like to know if have you made a decision about the money? I set my fork aside and looked at my family. They were waiting, holding their breath. 6 months ago, I would have seen only greed and calculation in their eyes. But now I saw uncertainty, hope, and most importantly, a willingness to accept whatever decision I made. Yes, I answered. I've decided to divide the inheritance. 1/3 will go to charity, to a fund for the elderly who live alone. I've already contacted several organizations, and I've chosen one whose goals and methods of work are close to my own. I paused, watching their reactions. No one objected. No one showed disappointment. They simply waited for me to continue. 1/3 will be split between you, Perry, and Luella. Not equally, but according to need. Perry, you have a stable, well-paying job. Luella, you and Finley have a more complicated situation, especially with him moving around for work. So you'll get a little more. Perry nodded, showing no displeasure that his share would be smaller. That was new. In the past, he'd always insisted on a fair, that is, equal division of everything. And I'm keeping 1/3 for myself, I finished. For traveling, for new hobbies, for the life I want to live while I still have time and energy. That's fair, Perry said. More than fair. I'm glad you feel that way, I smiled. Because there's something else. I'm going to sell this house. Now there was real surprise on their faces. Sell the house? Luella interjected. But where are you going to move to? I've got my eye on a small apartment closer to the center of town, with a good view of the harbor and most importantly, no garden to maintain. But this house, there are so many memories here, Perry objected. We grew up here. Daddy loved this house. Yes, I agreed. But a house isn't the walls, it's the people who live in them. And right now, this house is too big for me alone. Besides, it holds so many memories of Harold that sometimes it hurts. I looked at their puzzled faces and added more gently, I'm not disappearing from your lives. I just want to live in a place that will be my own choice, not a legacy of the past. A place where I can start a new chapter. I understand, Vanity said abruptly. A new beginning requires new scenery. I smiled gratefully at her. Perhaps there was some truth in what she said. A new home symbolized a new life for me, unburdened by past hurts and disappointments, without the usual roles and expectations. What about the holidays? Abigail asked. We always gathered here at Christmas. We'll still get together, sweetheart, I replied, just in a different place. Maybe sometimes at my place, sometimes at your parents', or at Perry and Vanity's. And sometimes maybe we'll all go somewhere together, to the sea or to the mountains. Like a real adventure? She perked up. Exactly, I winked at her. Life's too short to always do the same thing. After dinner, Perry and Finley did the dishes, and Luella, Vanity, and I went into the living room. The kids scattered around the house, Jude with the phone as usual, Heather with a book, Abigail deciding to help her father and uncle in the kitchen. Mom, Luella said as we settled on the couch, I want you to know that Finley and I talked a lot about what happened, about how we've treated you over the years. Perry and I too, Vanity added. It was sobering. I'm glad you're thinking about it, I replied, because it's not about the money. It's never been about the money. It's about respect, about seeing each other for who we are, not who we're comfortable presenting each other as. We get it, Luella nodded. And we want to change. Already we are. I can see that, I smiled, and I appreciate your efforts. Vanity, usually reserved and a little arrogant, suddenly took my hand. You know, Luella, I've always been a little jealous of you, she confessed. The way your children love you, the way your grandchildren are drawn to you. I've never been able to be so real. Always worried about appearances, what other people would think. You were just being you. I looked at her in surprise. I'd never thought that Vanity, always so sure of herself and her superiority, could be jealous of me. Being yourself is sometimes the hardest thing we can do, I replied. But it's also the most important. We talked late into the night, not only about the past and his mistakes, but also about the future, about our hopes and plans. Luella told me she was thinking of changing jobs. Accounting had never been her passion. She dreamed of writing. Vanity admitted that she was tired of the endless race for status and luxury, that sometimes she just wanted to sit down with a cup of tea and a good book, not to attend another charity event. We spoke as equals, as women, each with her own life, her own joys and sorrows, her own dreams and fears. Not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, not as mother and daughter, but as friends sharing their innermost things. When everyone started going home, I felt not relief, as I used to feel after family reunions, but a slight sadness of parting. For the first time in a long time, I actually felt good with my family. We'll stop by tomorrow and help you unpack, Perry said, saying goodbye. And I'll set up a meeting with a realtor if you do decide to sell. Thank you, I hugged him. But take your time. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. Except Cornwall, he said with a smile. Ellie's probably already planning your next visit. Actually, we're thinking of traveling to Italy together, I admitted. I've always wanted to see Venice. Italy? He looked surprised, but not alarmed like before. Sounds wonderful. Maybe you could bring back some new pictures for your collection. I will, I nodded. And maybe for a new exhibition. When everyone was gone, I walked around the house, so familiar and so foreign. Every room held memories happy and sad, important and fleeting. Here Perry had taken his first steps. Here Luella had written her first poem. Here Harold and I had spent the last evening before he died. But now I was ready to let go of the past, not to forget it, not to cross it out, but just to let it become part of history, not an anchor holding me in place. I lay in my bed, looking up at the ceiling, and thought about how my life had changed in those 6 months. I had gone from being invisible, a function, a convenient grandmother, to a person with her own desires and rights. A person who is seen, heard, respected. And my family has changed too. We've all changed. Learned to see each other not only as familiar roles, but as living people with their own strengths and weaknesses, fears and hopes. The money I almost gave to charity played its part. It was the catalyst that made us all stop and rethink our relationships. But in the end, it wasn't about them. It was about the love that had always been between us, but was buried under layers of resentments, fears, and habits. As I fell asleep, I thought about how tomorrow would be a new day, a new chapter of my life. A chapter in which I will be not only a mother and grandmother, but also a photographer, a traveler, an explorer of the world. A chapter in which my family will be a part of my life, but not my whole life. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to what tomorrow would bring.